Peppa Pig, the tunnel. It started on an ordinary day. Peppa and George were walking to the park. The weather was calm, the sky pale white, no sun, no rain. Peppa held George's hoof. He was quieter than usual. They passed the swings, the benches, and then George stopped. Peppa looked ahead. Between the bushes was an opening that hadn't been there before. The ground dipped slightly, like it had sunken. The entrance was low, stone-lined. Too neat, too precise. Peppa frowned. George let go of her hoof and stepped forward, without a word, calmly, as if he knew where he was going. She called out, but he was already gone. The tunnel was darker than it should have been. The light from behind didn't reach in. Peppa entered. One step, then another, until she was surrounded by thick, sticky silence. She walked along the narrow stone passage, each step echoing dull and strange, like the ground wasn't quite ground. The walls weren't wet, but they smelled of damp stone, and the air felt perfectly still, like no breeze, no echo. When Peppa stepped out, she found herself in the park. At first glance, the same one, but something was off. The trees were taller, their branches too symmetrical. The swings hung still, even with no wind. The grass was pale, the sound muffled, no birds. The park sign had the same shape, but the letters were wrong. They looked copied, like someone had drawn them from memory. She walked home. It was where it should be. Same roof, same windows, but the door hung crooked, and on it was a plaque that read, "The Pig Family," written in a style that wasn't theirs. Inside, the house smelled like home, but only in the hallway. Further in, the scent vanished. The kitchen had 3 cups, one half full, 2 empty and unwashed. Daddy Pig was sitting at the table, but when she blinked, the chair was empty. The family photos on the wall looked old. They showed her George, Mummy, Daddy, but the faces were wrong. Office. Like someone tried to recreate them from memory. She went upstairs to her room. The toys were in the right places, but George's dinosaur had blue eyes, not black, and her favorite doll was facing the wall. She had never left it like that. Peppa opened the wardrobe. Only one dress hung inside, red, like hers, but far too big. On the windowsill lay a drawing, done in pencil. It showed the tunnel. Beneath it, a note in a child's writing, "I'm inside." In the backyard stood another tunnel, wider, not the same, but similar. Peppa peered in. Nothing, just darkness. On the ground before it sat a pale stone. Pressed into it, a small hoof print. She walked back to the park. It was still empty, but on every bench lay a toy, each one slightly wrong. A doll with 2 left legs, a bear with both eyes on one side. Returning home took longer. Each step stretched. When she arrived, the door was open. On the hallway floor, footprints, wet, leading inward. The lights were on inside, but when she called out, no one answered. By the 4th day, she stopped calling. The tunnel behind the house was gone. The photos on the wall had faded, and in her room, another dress, smaller. In the kitchen, 4 cups. One was new. On it was the name Peppa, but not in her handwriting. Sometimes at night she hears footsteps in the hallway, and a child's voice, software, not quite her own. It calls someone by name, and each time she feels more certain it's calling her.
Peppa Pig. The Smile Game. It all started on an ordinary day. During recess, under a grey sky, the children were playing in the schoolyard. Peppa sat on a bench next to Susie. Rebecca was building a tower out of sticks. Danny was chasing a ball. And Candy just stood there, watching, for a long time, without blinking. Then she said, "Let's play a game. Who can smile the longest?" Everyone laughed. "But there are rules," she added. "No blinking, no looking away, and no stopping." "What's the prize?" asked Pedro. Candy smiled. "The winner stays." They stood in a circle. 6 children, 6 faces, 6 smiles. At first it was fun. They giggled, made faces. Someone even sneezed from laughing too hard. But soon the silence thickened. The smiles froze. Their eyes grew tense. Time seemed to slow down. No one knew how long they had been standing there. Seconds? Minutes? Pedro gave up first. He squinted and turned away. Then Rebecca. Her eyes were watering. She blinked, almost with relief. 3 remained, Peppa, Susie, and Candy. No one spoke, only smiles, only staring eyes. Susie blinked. Candy won. But she didn't stop smiling, even when the game was over. The next day, Susie didn't come to school. "She's sick," said the teacher, but she said it too quickly. No details. Pedro was gone too, and Rebecca. Candy sat at her desk, the same smile on her face. She didn't blink the entire lesson. She wrote, ate, breathed, without blinking. Even when others whispered, even when the teacher called her name, she just stared and smiled. At recess, Peppa approached her. "Where's Susie?" she whispered. Candy slowly turned her head and smiled even wider, so wide her cheeks looked stretched. No words, no blinking. That evening, Peppa couldn't eat. She kept remembering the circle, the eyes, the smiles, how hard it was to breathe when no one was laughing, just holding their faces. Her mother noticed. "Everything okay, Peppa? If someone smiles too long, is that normal?" Mummy paused. "It just means they're very happy," she said, and turned away. That night, Peppa woke up. A rustling sound outside her window. She got up and looked into the dark. At the edge of the road, beneath the street lamp, sat Candy. The same smile, the same wide eyes, two white teeth, too still. Peppa backed away, closed the curtains, went to the mirror in her room, looked at her own face, and for a moment, her reflection smiled before she did. The next morning, Candy wasn't at school, but on Peppa's desk lay a white sheet of paper. On it, a circle. Inside, a face. Too simple, too wide a smile, black dot eyes. And beneath it, in thin writing, "Now you." When Peppa looked up, the classroom was empty, except for the mirror in the corner, and in it, her reflection, already smiling.
Peppa Pig. The switch. The morning didn't start as usual. Peppa woke up with a strange feeling. The bed felt too wide, the blanket unfamiliar, the pillow too low. She lifted her hoof to push the blanket off and stopped. It was small, round, and trembling. She sat up. Everything around her seemed huge. The room stretched upward. The bed looked taller. The curtains like walls. Peppa slowly approached the mirror and froze. Looking back at her was George. Same posture, same eyes, but she was inside. She didn't scream. She couldn't. At the same time, in the next room, George sat up in bed. The blanket slipped from his shoulders. He looked at his hooves. Long, straight, wrong. He stood, walked to the mirror. In the reflection, Peppa, frightened. He opened his mouth, but silence. No words, no sound. His throat strained. Nothing came out. They met in the hallway, stared at each other. Peppa in George's body, George in Peppa's. Two pairs of eyes filled with panic. They tried to speak, tried to say anything, but no sound came, only open mouths and silence. Downstairs, Mummy was setting plates. Daddy was reading the newspaper, just like always. Peppa and George came down, unsteady, stumbling in unfamiliar legs, the same faces, but not their movements. Mummy looked up and smiled. Daddy gave a little nod. No one noticed. Peppa tried to explain with gestures, pointed to herself, then to George, then to her reflection in a spoon. No reaction. Mummy just patted her on the head, wordlessly. The whole day passed in silence. Peppa and George stayed close, trying to undo it, to return to normal. They drew in the dirt. Words, arrows, faces, but the wind blew it all away, and the grown-ups never looked. That night, Peppa lay in the wrong bed. Her body felt small, fragile. She closed her eyes, but there was no sleep, only blankness. Footsteps in the hallway. She got up. So did George. They met by the stairs, walked together silently. Their legs trembled. The world felt tilted, and then they saw it, a mirror, hanging on the wall. It hadn't been there before, old, dusty, but the reflection was clear, and inside, them, the real ones. Peppa was Peppa. George was George. They stood behind the glass, moving, saying something, staring directly at them, but they couldn't get out. Peppa touched the mirror. George did too, and then vanished. like they had never been there at all. Morning. Mummy cooked. Daddy read. Peppa and George, still in the wrong bodies, sat down to eat, moving more confidently, looking at each other not with fear, but with quiet acceptance. No one noticed. One day passed, then another. They stopped trying to write, stopped looking for the mirror, stopped touching their faces. The new bodies felt normal, the way they walked, familiar. One day, Peppa looked into the window. A strange face looked back, but she didn't flinch. George sat near the wall and drew. He was drawing himself, but on the paper it was Peppa. Sometimes they still stand at the mirror, together, and sometimes they see two figures inside, standing too still, too long, and neither of them asks anymore which one was switched. Peppa Pig Alone. Peppa woke up in her bed, quiet, too quiet, no kitchen sounds, no George's footsteps. The window was shut, but the daylight seemed dull and pale. She walked downstairs. 2 cups sat on the table in the kitchen. There was no steam. Mummy usually sang in the mornings. But now, silence. "Mummy," Peppa called. "George?" No answer, only a faint crackle from the radio, as if it had just been turned off. She walked through the whole house. All the rooms were in place, the beds neatly made, everything tidy, but no one was there. Peppa stepped outside. The grass was damp, the sky, the color of milk, cloudless. The neighbor's door was wide open, but inside, nothing. She knocked on Susie Sheep's door. No reply. Inside, the same eerie neatness. Toys perfectly arranged, an empty sofa, the clock ticking, tick-tick alone. There was no wind on the street, no birds, no cars. The playground was undisturbed, the sand perfectly smooth as if no one had ever played there. She returned home. Then, a click. The radio turned on by itself, static, and then, a voice, low, flat, emotionless. "You weren't supposed to wake up." Peppa froze. "Who is this? Where is everyone?" Silence. She walked through the house again. Doors led to the wrong places. The bathroom door opened to a staircase. The closet to someone else's bedroom. The mirrors turned dim. They showed rooms she wasn't in. She ran back to the radio. "Tell me where my mummy and George are." The voice returned. "We removed them while you slept. You weren't meant to wake up. You broke the order." Peppa cried. She hid under the table, hugging her knees. The whispering from the radio continued, but the words became less clear, as if someone was learning how to speak. The house grew darker. The wall clock stopped. Outside the window, nothing. No shadows, no footsteps, no trees, only blank whiteness, as if the world was being erased. A sheet of paper appeared on the floor, drawn in crayon, her room, and a single message. "There's no way back." The radio spoke again, now in her own voice. Perfect mimicry. Phrases she had already said. Repeated, like a recording, but slower each time, and more distorted. She didn't know how long it had been, whether it was day or night. But on the 7th time the radio said her name, a new voice came from the speaker, software, childlike. "Peppa, I'm outside, come out, only you, we'll start again." She walked to the front door, opened it, but it wasn't the street. Only whiteness, endless, a figure in the distance, tall, blurred, too thin, too still, and all that remained in the house, an open door, an empty radio, and a single line carved into the wall. Now everything is correct again. Peppa Pig, the new neighbor. It all began early one morning. The sky was gray, and the wind was driving dry leaves down the street. Peppa walked to the window and suddenly stopped. Out on the empty lot behind their house stood a house. Old, gray, with a sagging roof, but that lot had always been empty. Peppa was sure of it. "Mummy, Daddy!" she called. "Where did that house come from?" Mummy poured tea and Daddy flipped through his newspaper. "It's always been there, Peppa," said Daddy, too quickly, too calmly. Peppa frowned but said nothing. That day Peppa and George were playing in the garden, and that's when they saw him for the first time. Standing behind the fence was a wolf, but not an ordinary one. His fur was snow white, almost glowing against the gray sky. His eyes black, without any shine, and his smile too straight, too empty of any real feeling. He simply stood there, silently staring at them. George huddled behind her. "Hello," the wolf finally said. His voice was strange, dry, like crunching snow. The next day, the white wolf stood by their gate. Daddy went out and shook his paw. Mummy invited him into the house. Peppa stayed back, feeling her hooves tense. "Who is that?" she asked. "Our old friend," Mummy said, smiling a little too widely. "You know him." But Peppa didn't know him. She was certain she didn't. On the third day, the white wolf sat with them at breakfast. He ate his porridge slowly. He didn't blink. His movements were too precise, like a wind-up toy. Whenever he looked at Peppa, she felt a cold chill run down her back. His paws were thin, too long for a normal wolf, and when he set down his spoon, the table creaked under his touch. On the fourth day, Peppa woke to the creaking of the floorboards. She opened her eyes. The white wolf stood in the doorway. His white fur glowed softly in the dim light of the room. He simply stood and stared. His shadow stretched in a long line across the floor to her bed. Peppa squeezed her eyes shut. When she opened them again, he was gone. But the door remained wide open. On the fifth day, strange changes began around the house. In the family photographs, someone new had appeared. A tall, blurred figure with a white patch where the face should be. His paw rested on Peppa's and George's shoulders. Their smiles in the pictures were too wide, drawn on almost. When Peppa finally gathered her courage and asked, "Why is he living with us?" Daddy calmly replied, "Peppa, he's always been part of our family." And Daddy said it as if he barely believed it himself. On the sixth night, Peppa and George decided to run away. They crept down the stairs, quietly opened the front door, but outside, there was no street, no garden, only thick white fog stretching endlessly into the distance, and in that fog shadows moved, tall, twisted. When they turned around, the white wolf was already behind them. He was closer than ever before. He slowly tilted his head to the side and whispered, "Home is where you are always expected." His voice was a whisper, scratching at the air. Peppa and George clung tightly to each other. The next morning, the pig family's house looked normal. Mummy set the table, Daddy read his newspaper, but in every family photograph now there were 5 figures, and in every window, if you looked closely, you could see a tall white figure standing just behind, and dark eyes staring straight at you, never blinking.